The snow hadn't started falling yet, but the air outside my cabin carried that stillness, like the world was holding its breath. I was nestled in my usual armchair, worn leather molded to the shape of me over the years, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, the steam curling gently as it met the chill seeping in from the old window frames. My phone vibrated on the table beside me. I almost didn't reach for it. Most messages I got these days were from Reverend Leo or the general store confirming a delivery, but I did reach, and I wish I hadn't. The screen lit up with a message from Lucille, my ex-wife. I hadn't spoken to her directly in years. There'd been no need. Everything we ever needed to discuss had long dissolved into silence, replaced by the occasional passive-aggressive message filtered through Jasmine or an email from a lawyer, long after the divorce dust had settled. But this message wasn't passive. It was a blade. You're not invited to your daughter's wedding. We don't want you ruining her special day. I read it once, then again, and again. My fingers gripped the mug tighter with each word that burned itself into my mind. Ruining her special day? My daughter, Jasmine, my only child, the one I held the day she was born with tears in my eyes and an oath in my chest. I would always protect her, even if the world turned against me. I thought nothing could shake me anymore. But those words did. I put the mug down, slowly, carefully, like if I moved too fast, the world might shatter. My hands trembled slightly, and I pressed my fingers to my temple, trying to stop the sudden pounding in my skull. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcome. She was getting married, and I was to be kept away, like some ghost of a father who never existed, like some stain they couldn't bleach out of their perfect day. But Lucille, she didn't know the truth. She didn't know the quiet love I poured into every inch of that wedding. She didn't know about the late nights spent reviewing floral designs, about the hours on the phone with Reverend Leo to secure the venue, about the meetings with Camille, the planner I'd hired under a different name so Lucille would never sniff me out. She didn't know I paid for it all, not just the big-ticket items, but the little things too. The silk napkins, the string lights, the customized menu cards Jasmine once doodled as a child, dreaming of her someday wedding. I'd been there, quietly, steadily, like a lighthouse she couldn't see but that kept her shore lit all the same. She thought she could erase me with a text, that a few keystrokes could sever the bond between a father and his daughter. But that's not how love works. Real love, the kind that never stops, even when it hurts, builds monuments in the shadows. And mine had built her wedding. I sat back, my heart twisting with a mixture of grief and fire. Jasmine. God, I remembered her as a little girl, all big eyes and bigger questions. She used to run around the backyard in a white sheet like it was a wedding dress, trailing behind her as she shouted, "Daddy, play the harp." I'm walking down the aisle. I didn't know then that she meant it literally. That one day she'd ask for harp music and lemon cake and lavender peonies. That I'd remember every word. And I had. When she got engaged, I knew Lucille would try to take it all. The spotlight, the glory, the role of sole parent. I let her have the illusion. What mattered to me was Jasmine's joy. I didn't need credit. I just needed her day to be perfect. I made the promise when she was 12, after she cried into my chest, because Lucille forgot to pick her up from school again. I'd brushed her hair back and told her, no matter what happens, when the day comes, I'll make sure your wedding is everything you dreamed of. And I kept it, even when Jasmine stopped calling, even when the letters I sent for her birthdays came back unopened or were never acknowledged. I kept giving, quietly, faithfully, not because I was a fool, but because I'm her father. And that doesn't change just because your name isn't on a guest list. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the lake beyond the pines. It was still, reflective, like the surface of my own sorrow. I wasn't invited, but I was already there, in every blossom and bough, every velvet ribbon and whispered vow. My absence wouldn't erase me. The truth had a way of blooming when the time was right, like the peonies that would line her aisle. Lucille thought she was silencing me, but all she'd done was light the fuse. After the divorce, the silence between Jasmine and me started like a whisper, soft, uncertain, but it grew into a wall. Not because I wanted it that way, not because I gave up, but because Lucille had always been louder. She didn't scream. She was more skilled than that. Her weapon wasn't volume. It was poison, subtle and slow, slipped into every conversation, every memory she could twist into a blade. I remember the first time I realized she was turning Jasmine against me. It was during her 12th birthday. I had mailed a silver charm bracelet, custom-made, each charm chosen to reflect a memory between us. A tiny harp, a lemon slice, a lavender petal. Inside the box was a handwritten note for the young woman with dreams too big for one lifetime. Love always, Dad. Jasmine never called. Not a thank you. Not a text. Just silence. And when I followed up, Lucille said, she doesn't want gifts from someone who abandoned her. Abandoned her? No, that wasn't the truth. The truth was, Lucille cheated first. I caught her with Trevor. That smarmy grin and rehearsed charm he wore like cologne. She didn't deny it. In fact, she told me, you were too boring. Too predictable. Trevor makes me feel alive. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I packed my things. I gave her the house, the furniture, the SUV. She demanded full custody, said I traveled too much for work, that I wouldn't be stable. I didn't fight. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want Jasmine to see her parents tearing each other to shreds in court. I believed foolishly, maybe, that time would tell the truth. That Jasmine would grow up and see who really showed up, even if I was never physically there. But Lucille was clever. She intercepted my birthday cards, the checks for Jasmine's school trips. She claimed the college tuition I wired directly as her sacrifice. She made sure Jasmine saw her as the provider, the backbone, the everything. And me? I was just the bank account, a shadow, an afterthought. And yet, I stayed, behind the curtain, watching, waiting, because I made a promise. When Jasmine was 12, she came into the kitchen late one night, long after Lucille had stormed out after another argument. Her eyes were red, her voice quiet. Daddy, she whispered, when I grow up and get married, can it be in a garden? With flowers and music? And can you walk me down the aisle? I remember kneeling beside her, brushing that unruly curl from her cheek and saying, of course, I'll make it the wedding of your dreams. No matter what. She fell asleep in my arms that night, and I made a vow. So when I heard she got engaged, I knew Lucille would try to make it hers. A spectacle, a display, a performance, not a celebration of love, but a show of control. And Jasmine, caught in the middle, wouldn't know what was real. That's when I called Reverend Leo. Leo had been a quiet constant in my life since college. A man of few words and strong convictions. He ran Willowmere Gardens, a place Jasmine adored as a little girl. We used to take her there on Sundays when Lucille was too tired from her parties. Jasmine loved the daisies, the cobblestone paths, the ivy-covered arch. She once said it felt like a secret fairy tale place only we knew. I reached out to Leo and told him everything. That I wanted to pay for the wedding anonymously. That Lucille must never find out. That I needed his help to honor a promise to a girl who'd forgotten how much her father loved her. He didn't hesitate. Through Leo, I contacted every vendor. I used fake names. Hired a planner, Camille, who understood discretion better than most spies. Booked the chapel. Ordered the flowers. The catering. The invitations. All of it. Paid in full, invoices routed through trust accounts and dummy businesses. And with each decision, I imagined Jasmine's face. Her smile. Her gasp when she saw the harpist play Canon in D. When she tasted the lemon cream cake. When she walked under that ivy arch. I didn't need a seat at the wedding. I needed her to feel loved. Even if she didn't know it came from me. But deep down, I still hoped. Hoped that maybe, just maybe, she'd feel something in her heart she couldn't explain. A familiar warmth in every petal and string note. And maybe when she looked around, she'd remember. That's why Lucille's message hit so hard. Not because of her cruelty. I was used to that. But because it proved just how deep the lie had sunk. Jasmine didn't just believe I was unworthy of being there. She believed I shouldn't be there. Still, I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't demand my right. Because I had something stronger than permission. I had a promise. And I had a plan. Trevor was always the kind of man who mistook flash for substance. He walked into rooms like he owned them, wore cologne like a fog, and talked about business deals that never quite had paperwork. When Lucille married him, I knew exactly what game she was playing. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a mask. Someone who could pretend to be the image of success she craved. And Trevor? He was more than willing to play that role. The day Jasmine got engaged, Lucille spun the narrative like silk. Her daughter was marrying a promising young chef, Marcus, and of course, the wedding would be grand, exclusive, tasteful. She posted about it on social media like it was her own second coming, tagged brands, hinted at a partnership with a designer who wouldn't recognize her if she fell into their showroom. She claimed they booked Willowmere Gardens. Her idea, she emphasized, said she was footing the entire bill. And Trevor, with his arm around her waist and his camera-ready smile, nodded along. What no one knew, what not even Jasmine knew, was that I had already signed the contracts. Months ago, in full, Willowmere Gardens had always been our secret. Mine and Jasmine's. A place where life felt simpler, where we could escape the storm Lucille often stirred up at home. When I reached out to Reverend Leo, I explained everything. How Lucille had taken everything. How I needed to do this for Jasmine quietly, without fanfare, without credit. Leo didn't ask questions. He just nodded, the way only a true friend does, and said, "Let's make it beautiful." Through Leo, I began. Each vendor was contacted under carefully constructed aliases. I used names from books Jasmine and I used to read together. Mr. Darcy Event Planning, A. March Catering, L. Montgomery Linens. They looked ridiculous on paper, but they meant something to me. A reminder of who I was doing this for. The florist, Anna, was hesitant at first until I told her what Jasmine loved: lavender peonies, lilacs, white roses. She blinked at the list and said, "Someone's been paying attention." I just smiled. Always. Lucille took over the planning with all the subtlety of a steamroller. She bragged to friends about custom silk linens, gourmet food tastings, imported flatware, and hand-carved wooden chairs. She claimed she'd secured the harpist personally, someone she'd discovered. What she didn't realize was that every decision she made had already been made for her. I'd orchestrated it all. The cake tasting was the most poetic. Lucille brought Jasmine to what she thought was a top-tier bakery she'd scouted online. In reality, it was my friend Lydia's shop, rebranded temporarily for discretion. Lydia had been in my life since culinary school. She remembered Jasmine's obsession with lemon cream filling and how she once stood on a chair in her apron, insisting we add more zest to the batter. I gave Lydia my mother's old recipe. She nailed it in one try. Jasmine took a bite during the tasting and smiled, eyes closing. "This tastes like, I don't know, like something I loved a long time ago." Lucille didn't blink. "Of course it does. I wanted it to be special." Special, right. Trevor, meanwhile, strutted around pretending to be the provider. He shook hands with vendors, introduced Jasmine at events as my girl, posed in photos with a drink in hand, bragging about the exclusive bar he was planning to open someday. He liked being the center of attention, but he had no idea how deep the wedding's roots were in my love, not his performance. He never read her journals, never sat through her monologues at 12 when she dreamed out loud about music and candles and garden lights. He just showed up late and loud and wanted applause. Jasmine was quieter than I remembered. Still kind, still gentle, but there was something buried under her politeness. A weariness. I watched clips from the wedding planner's updates, saw her politely nod while Lucille barked out instructions. I wondered if she knew something was off. If the weight of the day, the weight of Lucille's control, was making her ache. If some part of her still remembered the way it used to feel when love wasn't performative but real. And Marcus, he was different. I hadn't met him, but from what I'd heard, he was simple, quiet, thoughtful, a chef with no flair for drama. That gave me hope. Jasmine didn't choose someone like Trevor. She chose the opposite. Maybe her heart still knew what was true. As Lucille paraded around pretending to bankroll everything, I stayed in the background. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. I wanted Jasmine to have a day untouched by bitterness. A day filled with the details she once whispered to me under a blanket fort in our living room. I didn't need the world to know. I just needed her to feel it. The only thing I underestimated was how long a lie can stand before the truth demands to be seen. But I was patient. I was a father, and I had already planted every seed. Lucille had always believed she was in control. She carried herself like a conductor at a symphony, baton in hand, cueing violins and flutes with imperious flicks of her wrist. But she never realized the orchestra was already playing a different melody, one I'd written long before she ever picked up the baton. Camille was the planner I hired under a pseudonym. Camille Grace, a name I crafted by combining Jasmine's middle name and the street where she first rode her bike without training wheels. Camille had a quiet strength to her. She knew how to nod along, to let Lucille believe she was steering the ship, while gently, precisely, redirecting her back to the course I'd charted months in advance. Lucille micromanaged like it was a sport. She insisted on reviewing every flower arrangement, every lighting setup, every seating plan. She barked at Camille over text, called her at midnight with inspirations she'd stolen off wedding blogs. The color scheme, she said, will be lavender and ivory. It came to me in a dream. I nearly laughed the day Camille forwarded me that message. I had chosen lavender and ivory because of a crumpled drawing Jasmine made when she was 8. It was of her dream wedding, scrawled in markers with mismatched hearts, one of them slightly off-center because her hand slipped. Lucille thought she invented everything she touched. She didn't realize she was dancing to a song she never heard. The table settings? Pulled straight from a diner Jasmine and I used to visit on Sunday mornings. The candle scent? Warm vanilla from the lotion Jasmine would sneak from her mom's cabinet and smear on my arm just to see if I noticed. I always did. But I played along. Even the cake, Lucille boasted to her friends that she selected the refreshing lemon cream flavor because it was sophisticated. I nearly choked on my tea when Camille texted me that snippet from a conversation she overheard. She didn't know the recipe came from my mother, passed down to Lydia, my friend and secret collaborator in this entire production. Jasmine used to lick the bowl clean when we made it together. That flavor wasn't chosen for class. It was chosen for memory. Camille kept me updated like clockwork. Today, she screamed because the chair bows weren't regal enough. She's making a fuss over the place cards. Wants to change the font as something called Victorian Val. I let her. I didn't care about fonts. I cared about Jasmine feeling wrapped in the invisible arms of someone who remembered every version of her. Someone who didn't need the spotlight to prove love. Lucille moved through every decision like a general commanding troops, never realizing her soldiers were loyal to someone else. She believed she was architect and engineer and queen of the day. But the foundation was mine. The blueprint was mine. I had mapped it all months before she ever knew Jasmine was engaged. She was just stepping into a play where all the lines had been written long ago. One day, Camille sent me a photo. It was of the centerpiece Lucille had designed. I stared at it for a moment, heart catching in my throat. It was an exact replica of the first bouquet Jasmine ever made. She was 6, and she gathered wildflowers from the backyard, arranged them in a chipped teacup, and set them on my desk. She called it Dad's Daisy Burst. I kept the teacup for years. Lucille found it once and threw it away, said it was clutter. Now, without realizing it, she'd resurrected it. That centerpiece was my daughter's joy, not Lucille's vision. That was my proof Lucille could take credit, but she could never touch the heart of what we built. Trevor played his part, too. He paraded through meetings like he had a clue, making loud jokes and suggesting idiotic, modern twists like LED-lit boutonnieres. Lucille brushed off his suggestions, of course. Trevor was a prop, a trophy, nothing more. When he suggested that Marcus and Jasmine do a choreographed dance, Lucille nearly threw her wine glass across the room. Camille later told me Jasmine looked ready to vanish. I wondered if Jasmine felt any of it. If some part of her recognized the layers of familiarity she couldn't quite place. The bouquet with the tiny silver thread stitched into the stems, taken from her favorite childhood blanket. The soft lilac lighting that mimicked the night light I used to click on after stories. The harp music drifting through every rehearsal. Every note had meaning. Every detail was a whisper. I'm here. I remember. Lucille could never understand that kind of love. To her, weddings were transactions, power, status, control. But to me, this one was a promise. A quiet, sacred vow between father and daughter that even time, bitterness, and distance couldn't erase. So I let her strut, let her shout, let her believe. Because nothing is louder than the truth revealed in silence. And when that day came, when the curtain finally lifted, and she realized she was never the star of this story, I would be ready. Because I hadn't just planned a wedding. I had orchestrated a reckoning dressed in silk and sunlight. It had been a long time since I saw Jasmine in person, not in photos, not through Camille's discreet updates or Reverend Leo's security footage, but flesh and bone, movement and stillness. My daughter, my Jazz. It happened by accident. I was supposed to be picking up a custom pin set from a shop next to the florist, an old family-owned place downtown where the owner always hand-wrapped your purchase with a wax seal, just the way I liked it. I hadn't intended to linger, but when I stepped out with the small gift in hand, I saw her. She stood outside the florist window, arms crossed against her chest like she was hugging herself. Jasmine had always done that when she was thinking, held her elbows and rocked slightly, like the motion helped untangle whatever knot was forming in her mind. It struck me immediately how grown she looked, how graceful. She wasn't the 10-year-old with skin knees and a flower crown made of weeds anymore. She was a woman, a bride, my daughter. But she didn't see me. She turned slightly, her profile catching the light as she stared at the delicate spray of peonies in the display. Lavender peonies. I knew that look in her eyes. Nostalgia. A yearning that brushed the edge of memory. I wanted to call out, to tap the glass, to tell her I was here, that I never left. But I didn't, because I knew what Lucille had done. It hadn't happened all at once. It was slow erosion, lie by lie. A steady drip of poison over the years until the love between us had been painted over by someone else's brush. Lucille told her I stopped caring, that I stopped showing up, that I was too caught up in my own life to be a father. Jasmine was just a child when we split, too young to see what was really happening. And I'd refused to drag her into the mud. I thought shielding her from the worst would protect the best parts of us. But silence is dangerous. And Lucille had filled it with venom. Still, I never missed a payment. I never forgot a birthday. I sent gifts wrapped with care, cards handwritten and sealed with memories. I made sure her college tuition was covered, even when I had to take freelance work to balance it. I asked for nothing in return, not acknowledgement, not gratitude, only the belief that one day she'd remember. And now, I was giving her the wedding she dreamed of. The wedding she described to me between spoonfuls of cereal, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter at age 12. Back then, her voice was full of hope, her eyes wide with innocence. Lavender peonies, Dad, and a harp, and fairy lights. And I want lemon cake with that fluffy stuff Grandma used to make. I used to chuckle and scribble it down like a shopping list. But I never lost that page. I carried it with me like scripture. Every vendor knew. Every flower chosen with purpose. Every note of music selected like a thread in a tapestry. She didn't know it, but she was about to walk into her own childhood dream, and every corner of that day would whisper, "Your father never stopped loving you." She stepped into the florist, and I stayed hidden, watching through the reflection in the glass. The bell over the door jingled. I watched her reach out, fingertips brushing the edge of a petal, her expression softening. The clerk smiled and handed her a tiny sample bouquet. Jasmine inhaled, eyes fluttering shut. And for a split second, I saw it. Recognition. She didn't know why it felt familiar. But it did. I could tell. Something tugged at her memory, subtle and stubborn. That bouquet wasn't just flowers. It was years of bedtime stories, pancakes on Sundays, walks in the garden after rain. It was her father, invisible but present, in every petal. She paid and left, bouquet in hand, the hem of her coat brushing against the pavement. She passed within 10 feet of me, and I held my breath. Her scent, a mix of lilac and something warmer, struck me like a memory too long buried. My hands ached to reach out, but I clenched them tight, letting her pass like a ghost through my quiet world. She didn't see me, but I saw everything. I stayed a while after she left, staring at the display like it held answers. I felt something lodge in my throat, not quite grief, not quite pride. Maybe both. She didn't know the truth yet, but I believed, I had to believe, that she would. That this wedding would be more than just a ceremony. That it would be a reckoning, a revelation. She'd forgotten me, or been taught to forget me, but I never forgot her. And love like that doesn't die. It waits. Sometimes from the shadows. Sometimes from the sidewalk across the street from a florist shop. But always, always near. The day before the wedding, the world felt like it was holding its breath. I sat in my study, the fireplace humming low beside me, the camera feeds glowing on my monitor like portals into a place I no longer had the right to enter. Reverend Leo had installed them with careful precision, no invasive angles, no disrespect. Just enough to keep an eye on the venue I had poured my heart into. Willowmere Gardens was alive with motion. The caterers were unloading. The decorators, with their arms full of flowers and dreams, scurried back and forth like bees in spring. The chapel's arch glistened with fresh ivy. It was all real now. Camille had sent a message earlier. Everything's on schedule. Flowers bloom on cue. Pearls are stitched into the bouquet ribbon, like you asked. I stared at the text, a breath catching in my throat. Jasmine once told me, on a rainy afternoon, when I get married, Dad, I want my bouquet to feel like it's from heaven. And I promised her, then it will be. Now it was. Lucille's voice suddenly pierced the peace, echoing from one of the camera feeds. She was flustered, pacing by the reception area in a crisp cream blazer and 2 high heels. Trevor, I didn't approve this. This isn't our budget. She jabbed a manicured finger at the gilded cutlery and the added champagne pyramid, as narrowed like someone had slipped poison into her tea. The string quartet was already warming up in the distance, an unexpected upgrade from the solo harpist Lucille thought she'd booked. Trevor looked lost. He ran a hand through his overgelled hair and muttered, maybe it was, a donation? Maybe the planner found a sponsor. He always sounded like a man guessing his own lies. Emergency funds, he finally said, as though the words might magically make sense. Lucille wasn't buying it. There are imported roses in the welcome arch, Trevor. Do you know how much that costs? I smiled, just barely. The roses were from a vendor I knew in Charleston. He owed me a favor when I cashed in quietly. Jasmine had drawn them in her old sketchbook, the petals shaped like the ones she used to press between pages. I had waited years to see them bloom for her, and they had right on time. The venue buzzed with anticipation. Behind the tension in Lucille's voice, there was something else, panic. Not just about the money, but about control. The details were slipping through her fingers like sand. She'd spent months building this image of herself as the grand orchestrator, the benevolent mother funding a fairy tale. But now, the pieces weren't fitting her story anymore. And that terrified her. Because deep down, Lucille wasn't afraid of chaos. She was afraid of being seen as unneeded. I sipped my tea and leaned back. Everything was in place. The linens, soft as memory. The lighting, timed to shift as the sun dipped low. Even the guest favors, tiny lavender sachets wrapped in lace, had been chosen by me, hand-packed by Camille's team. Jasmine would find her name engraved in a delicate gold script on a bookmark resting beside her seat, the same line of poetry she once recited on the ride home from her school's spring concert etched below. And still, I rise with the sun you taught me to chase. Lucille had no idea. Trevor, already wilting under the pressure, muttered something about calling the florist. Lucille waved him off. No, this is sabotage. Someone's messing with me. Her paranoia was almost comical, like the universe had conspired to unravel her. But the truth was far simpler. This wasn't sabotage. This was Jasmine's dream. And I had made sure it came true. Camille called as I sat watching. Her voice was low, steady, as always. We're done here, she said. Every detail, just as you designed. Jasmine hasn't seen the full setup yet. She's resting. A little nervous. But she's smiling. That image almost undid me. Jasmine, smiling. On the eve of her wedding, surrounded by the echoes of a father's love she didn't yet know was hers. She asked about the harpist, Camille added. Said it reminds her of something. Of course it did. Music has memory. And I made sure every note was a thread connecting her back to me. She used to fall asleep to harp music. I played a recording every night when she was 5 because the sound soothed her nightmares. I still had the playlist saved. As Camille spoke, my eyes flicked back to the screen. Lucille had stormed off. Trevor was left behind, standing awkwardly near a caterer adjusting a crystal dish. He looked like a man out of place at his own wedding, only it wasn't his, and it never would be. This wasn't his story to rewrite. This wasn't Lucille's stage to command. This was Jasmine's story. And mine. Written years ago in the quiet language of promises and petals, whispered into sketchbooks and sung in lullabies. Built in shadows, yes, but with more light than Lucille could ever manufacture. Tomorrow, Jasmine would walk into the garden of her dreams. And she wouldn't know yet who had watered the soil or planted the seeds. But soon, very soon she would. The reception hall was dim, elegant, humming with soft voices and clinking glasses. The string quartet played in the background, just loud enough to set a tone, but not distract from the anticipation in the air. Jasmine sat at the head table, radiant in her gown, her hand wrapped around Marcus's. Her eyes glimmered with joy and nerves, unaware that the ground beneath her was shifting. That truth was about to bloom, irrevocable and undeniable. This was it, the moment I had planned for, timed with precision. Not a vindictive ambush, not cruelty, just clarity, a gift of truth wrapped in light and memory. Camille gave the signal. The lights dimmed slightly more. The music slowed, then faded. Conversations paused. A hush fell. The screen flickered to life. It began with the footage I'd saved from my old camcorder. Jasmine, no older than 6, standing in our backyard with daisies tangled in her hair. She grinned at the camera. When I grow up, she said, I want to get married in a garden, with lavender peonies and harp music and lemon cake. She paused, her expression serious, and Daddy will walk me down the aisle. A ripple of laughter moved through the guests. Light, affectionate. No one knew what they were watching just yet, just a sweet moment, a childhood dream. Lucille, already tipsy from too many glasses of overpriced wine, leaned forward slightly, squinting. The video continued. Jasmine at age 8, drawing her dream wedding dress with sparkly markers. At 12, dancing around the living room with a blanket veil, shouting, "Play Canon in D. That's the song." And then at 16, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and whispering to the camera, "I hope my wedding feels like love wrapped in sunlight." Then my voice, "I promise, Jazz. One day it will be. I'll make sure of it." Silence. The screen faded to black. The quiet was deafening. I could hear the heartbeat in my ears even from where I sat, unseen behind the partition near the garden's edge. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I was in every frame of that video, in every note, in every truth finally being told. Jasmine's face was unreadable. Her lips parted, her eyes locked on the screen even after it had gone dark. One hand slowly lifted to her mouth. Then, she looked down, at the bouquet in her lap. Lavender peonies. She touched the ribbon carefully, her fingers trembling. Lucille started to rise. That was just something from when she was a child," she said loudly, nervously, her voice brittle and sharp. "She doesn't even remember saying those things. This is a lovely wedding, and—" "No," Jasmine said, softly but firmly. She stood. Lucille froze. Jasmine's voice rose just enough to carry across the room. "This wasn't you." The guests looked back and forth between them, confused and murmuring. Marcus stood beside Jasmine now, gently placing a hand on her back. Jasmine stepped around the table, bouquet still clutched to her chest. Her eyes swept the room like she was searching for something, or someone. "Where's my father?" she asked. Her words hit like a wind across water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. Trevor shifted in his seat, jaw clenched, unsure what role to play now. Lucille flinched as if Jasmine had struck her. Lucille stammered, "Darling, we planned this together. I chose everything. You know that." "No," Jasmine said again. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. It was just certain, and that certainty stripped Lucille bare. Jasmine turned the bouquet slowly in her hands. Her fingers slipped under the satin ribbon tied near the stems. Then she paused, confused. She tugged lightly, and the hidden locket fell into her palm. I'd asked Camille to sew it in carefully, tucked where only Jasmine would find it. It was small, delicate, silver with a rose etching on the front. The same one I gave her for her 5th birthday, which Lucille claimed was too sentimental. Jasmine opened it. Inside, a photo of the two of us. She was 5, sitting on my shoulders, grinning with 2 missing front teeth. I was laughing, mid-motion, her hand tangled in my hair. On the back of the photo, engraved in tiny script, "I promised to make it perfect. Love, Dad." Her hands flew to her mouth as she gasped. Tears spilled over her lashes. She looked back at the guests, then at the string quartet, then at the harpist. The details were rushing in like a flood now. The ribbon, the bouquet, the music, the cake. Her childhood, echoing in every corner. Lucille reached for her. "Jasmine." Jasmine stepped away. "You lied to me." Lucille froze. Camille moved forward then, holding a microphone gently in one hand. Her voice was calm, clear, cutting. "This wedding was made possible by Calvin Brooks, who planned, paid for, and loved this day into existence. Every choice made here today came from him. This is his promise, fulfilled." Gasps broke out. Applause followed, but it was slow, stunned. Not celebration. Revelation. Lucille stood there, lips trembling, her empire crumbling around her. Trevor backed away from the table. The illusion was gone. All of it. Jasmine lifted her chin and whispered once more, this time with resolve. "Where is my father?" She held the locket like it was a living thing. Tender, reverent, as if it might whisper more truths if she only listened closely. Enough. Jasmine stood at the center of a wedding she now realized had been stitched together not by the hands of the mother who raised her, but by the father who had loved her in silence. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. The satin ribbon, the one she'd admired earlier without understanding why it felt so familiar, now made perfect sense. It wasn't just beautiful. It was hers. It was us. The exact ribbon she picked out with me in a fabric store years ago, after begging me to let her make a wedding bouquet for her stuffed bunny. I bought her 3 yards that day. She'd only needed 6 inches. I kept the rest. And now here it was, wrapped around the stems of lavender peonies. The same peonies she used to draw in her notebooks. The one she said felt like a hug in flower form. I'd remembered. She looked up slowly, as scanning the stunned crowd. Her breath hitched. I watched her through the camera feed, unable to move, unable to breathe. She was piecing it all together now. The music, the cake, the strings of lights, even the tiny pearls stitched along her bouquet's edge, the ones she once imagined would sparkle like stars if it rained. Lucille looked like a statue. All the polish, all the arrogance, all the carefully constructed lies had cracked, flaking away like brittle paint. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Trevor wasn't even beside her anymore. He'd quietly slipped away to the bar or the exit, anywhere but the center of this unraveling. Jasmine didn't give Lucille a glance. She was too focused on what was in her hands. She turned the locket over again. Her fingers brushed the inscription, lips silently forming the words. I promised to make it perfect. Love, Dad. She blinked rapidly, a tear escaping down her cheek. The harpist continued to play softly canon in D, just as she'd always wanted. I remembered how she used to sway to that melody in the living room, twirling in oversized socks while I clapped along like her only audience. She used to call it the forever song. And it played now, steady and sweet, weaving through the moment like a thread that had been waiting to be pulled taut. Camille stepped back into the shadows, having said all that needed to be said. Her job was done. The rest was Jasmine's. The bouquet in her hand shifted slightly, and something else caught her attention, something hidden in the folds of the ribbon. She reached in carefully and pulled out a tiny folded note. I hadn't planned for her to find it so soon. It was meant to be something she discovered later, when the night was quiet and the guests had gone. But fate had other ideas. She unfolded the square of parchment. My handwriting filled the page. Jazz. I remember everything. Your dreams, your drawings, your little whispers about lavender and lemon cake. I remember the way you looked when you told me I was the only person who really listened. That day, you asked me to make your wedding feel like sunlight and music. And I promised. Even when I couldn't be near, even when lies filled the space between us, I kept that promise. Because I am your father. I never stopped being your father. If you're reading this, then maybe, just maybe, you remember me too. Love, Dad. Jasmine let the note fall to her side, pressed both hands over her face, and cried. Not the quiet, hidden tears of a bride overwhelmed by the weight of the day, but the full-bodied sob of a daughter realizing she'd been loved in secret, unconditionally, all along. No one moved. The guests looked at each other, unsure if they should clap, if they should speak. Some were already dabbing at their own eyes. Others were simply stunned. The truth, so long buried, had surfaced in the most poetic, public way imaginable. Not with shouting, not with accusations, but with flowers and music and memory. Finally, Jasmine looked up. Her eyes scanned the garden. She wasn't asking anymore. She knew I was there. Somewhere. Dad, she said aloud, trembling, her voice full of hope and heartbreak and every emotion in between. Are you here? The crowd turned, some looking toward the chapel, others to the reception hall. But her gaze went beyond them all, toward the shadows beneath the pergola. Toward me. I hadn't planned to step forward yet. I wanted her to have her day, her truth, before my presence complicated it. But in that moment, with her bouquet in one hand and my letter in the other, how could I stay hidden? I stood, and though my legs shook, I walked. The crowd parted slowly, like a tide shifting back from the shore. Some recognized me. Others whispered. But Jasmine didn't move. She just watched me, eyes wide, tears running freely now, her mouth trembling as if afraid to believe it was really me. I stopped a few feet away. We stared at each other. So much time between us. So many lies. So many stolen years. Then she ran. Right into my arms. She ran into me like she'd been holding back for a lifetime. No hesitation, no glances over her shoulder, no second thoughts. Just arms wide, bouquet forgotten, feet flying. Jasmine collided with my chest, and I wrapped her in the kind of embrace I'd only been able to imagine for years, tight, trembling, a mix of joy and regret and something beyond words. She sobbed into my jacket, her fingers clutching the back of my shirt as if afraid I'd disappear again. But I wasn't going anywhere. I'm so sorry, Dad, she cried. I didn't know. She lied to me. She told me you didn't care. I know, I whispered, stroking her hair. But none of that matters now. You're here. And I'm here. I didn't care that dozens of eyes were watching, or that the entire reception had fallen into stunned silence. In that moment, there was only her. My daughter. The little girl who once made daisy crowns and told me I was her favorite person in the whole world. The young woman now standing in my arms, rediscovering something that had never truly left her. When she pulled back, her face was flushed, streaked with tears, but she was smiling. A real smile, one I hadn't seen in years. You remembered everything, she whispered. The flowers, the cake, the music. I nodded. Every word. Every dream. She looked down at her bouquet, fingers brushing the locket again. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I hesitated. Because I didn't want to ruin it. I didn't want to take anything away from you. I just wanted you to have your day, your happiness. Even if you never knew it came from me. She looked up again, eyes fierce now. You gave me more than a day. You gave me back the truth. Then her voice dropped, quiet and raw. Will you walk me down the aisle? The question stopped time. Across the lawn, Lucille stood rigid, arms crossed, her face pale. The guests had already decided where their loyalties lay. There was no question now. The video, the bouquet, the locket, the letter, it had all shattered the lie she spent years building. Trevor had disappeared entirely, and with him, her ability to deflect or redirect. I glanced toward Lucille for a moment. Not with spite. Not even with satisfaction. Just a calm finality. She had stolen so much, but she couldn't rewrite this. The truth had bloomed. Jasmine had found her way back. I turned back to my daughter. Of course I will, I said. My voice cracked. I've been waiting to walk you down the aisle since the day you were born. Jasmine took my hand, laced her fingers through mine. And just like that, we stepped forward together. The guests parted once more, forming a path down the garden aisle. The harpist played the first few notes of Canon in D again, softer this time, gentler. A second chance melody. Jasmine lifted her chin, eyes bright, bouquet in her other hand. Every step we took felt like a reclamation, not just of a moment, but of years. Of memories that had been buried under manipulation and silence. Lucille didn't move. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't speak. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she realized no apology could unburn what she'd scorched. Or maybe she just saw what everyone else did. She had lost. Jasmine leaned toward me slightly as we walked. I used to dream about this moment, she said. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing it could happen. And yet, I said, here we are. She smiled again, and I felt her squeeze my hand. The sunlight filtered through the treetops just right, casting a glow across the petals at her feet. The scent of lavender hung in the air. Everything was exactly as it should have been. When we reached Marcus, I placed her hand into his. He looked at me, not just with gratitude, but with understanding. He hadn't said much all day, but in his eyes, I saw something that settled me. He knew what Jasmine had just regained, and he would never ask her to lose it again. Before I stepped back, Jasmine pulled me close one last time. She whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I nodded, unable to speak. As I sat in the front row, I glanced around at the guests, some still teary-eyed, others quietly reflecting. The lie had been loud, but the truth had echoed. It had reached hearts. Jasmine's wedding wasn't just beautiful. It was honest, and that made it unforgettable. She stood now, not as someone's pawn or project, but as a woman rooted in love, real love. A love that doesn't always need to be seen to be felt. And as she began her vows, I felt something inside me finally exhale. This was the walk we both deserved. The garden glowed as if it had been waiting all these years to welcome her. Jasmine stood at the altar, her hands delicately wrapped around the bouquet I'd pieced together with memory, care, and quiet devotion. Beside her, Marcus stood steady, his presence calm, his eyes soft when they looked at her. The wind teased the petals of the lavender peonies around them, scattering a few across the aisle like nature's own blessing. Everything was perfect. Not because it followed a script, but because it came from love that had endured. I sat in the front row now. Visible, present, finally seen. Jasmine turned slightly and caught my eye. A smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and in that glance, I saw it, the little girl she used to be and the woman she'd become, woven together in a single expression. A thank you, a homecoming, a silent vow of her own. She hadn't just invited me back into her life. She brought me back into her heart. The officiant's voice rose gently above the breeze. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. But his words faded for me. Not because they weren't beautiful, they were, but because my mind had drifted to the journey it took to get here. I thought of the nights I spent at the edge of this dream, not sure if I'd ever be part of it. I remembered the ache of seeing Jasmine from afar, the silence of unanswered birthday cards, the sting of being erased, rewritten as a stranger in the story I helped begin. And yet here I was, watching my daughter stand beneath an ivy-laced arch, her veil glowing like mist in the golden light, her voice clear as she repeated her vows. She spoke of trust, of shared laughter, of long walks and lemon cake on rainy days. She said she loved Marcus for how he listened and how he made her feel safe, like she was finally home. I smiled, because I had made sure her wedding felt like home. Lucille was nowhere to be seen now. She'd vanished shortly after Jasmine asked me to walk her down the aisle. There was no dramatic exit, no shouting, just silence. The kind that comes when a story you've crafted crumbles beneath the weight of truth. I didn't need to see her face to know she'd felt it, the shift, the unraveling. In the end, she'd built her empire on a foundation of lies, and today, the truth had bloomed through every crack. When it was time for the rings, Jasmine handed her bouquet to Camille, who smiled and whispered something I couldn't hear. Camille had been the quiet architect beside me, helping build this moment stone by stone. And now, she stood beside Jasmine like a gentle witness to everything that had come full circle. The ceremony ended with cheers, with soft applause and the clink of glasses raised in joy. But the moment that stayed with me, etched into my soul, was when Jasmine turned back one last time, bouquet in hand, eyes brimming, and walked toward me. "Dad," she said, "I want you in every photo." I laughed through the sudden tightness in my throat. "Even the ones with silly smiles and awkward angles." "Especially those," she said. "We took them all, father and daughter, side by side." The sun dipped lower as the sky turned a soft rose gold. I held her close in each picture, my hand over hers, and in every frame, I saw peace. I saw the beginning of something healed. At the reception, Jasmine made a toast. She stood in the center of the garden, surrounded by tables flickering with candlelight, her voice strong. "I grew up believing a story that wasn't entirely true," she said. "I was told my father left, that he didn't care, that he forgot. But today, I found out that love doesn't always shout to be heard. Sometimes, it waits quietly in the wings, showing up in flowers and cake recipes and strings of light that feel like childhood." She looked at me. "My father never stopped loving me. He never stopped showing up, even when I didn't see him. Today is the wedding I always dreamed of, and now I know who made that dream come true." The guests stood and applauded, some with tears, others with warmth. Camille clinked her glass. Reverend Leo raised his hands in a silent blessing. And I sat there, hands folded in my lap, unable to stop the tears sliding down my cheeks. Not of grief, but of completion. Later that night, as the music played and Jasmine danced barefoot under the canopy of stars, she came to sit beside me. "I think this is the happiest I've ever been," she said. I smiled. "You deserve it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "So do you." The garden held us in that moment, lavender-scented, music-filled, peaceful. Lucille's face turning pale, her lies exposed, her narrative unraveled. That wasn't the victory. The real victory was this: a daughter's trust returned, a promise kept, and a love that waited through everything, patient and unshaken. This was the wedding I promised, and I kept it.